So today we're going to take a look at entering transactions into Aplos. This is one of the main functionalities of the accounting side of the software, and there's several different screens where you can enter different types of transactions, and that's what we're going to take a look at today. So to get started, we're going to go to Fund Accounting in the top navigation, and then we're going to go to Transactions. And everything that we're looking at today is going to be in this drop-down menu here. So we're going to work our way through and take a look at some examples. So let's start at the top with registers. This is where you're probably going to be spending a large majority of your time as you're entering in transactions. The register screen would be used to record any transaction that has an impact on a register account. Your register accounts would be something like your bank accounts, or if you have a credit card, that would also be set up as a register to track charges and payments. And you might even have petty cash that you're keeping track of, which would also be set up as a register in Aplos. So if you have multiple register accounts, you can switch between them with the drop-down that's available here in this blue box in the upper left here. So right now we have our checking account pulled up, but if we needed to work in our savings account, or if I needed to record some charges or a payment on my credit card, I can select that here. But we'll go ahead and stick with checking just to make it easy. The next kind of just getting acquainted with this screen, you'll have your entry screen here. So this is empty and ready for us to enter a new transaction. You'll notice this is the same entry screen is going to be used for deposit or payment. When we're entering a transaction, the type of transaction, whether it's a payment or a deposit, will be determined by where we're putting the amount of the transaction, and we'll go over an example of each. We also have here another tab for adding contributions. We're not going to go into detail about this tab today. We have a separate resource that kind of goes over recording contributions. This is the same functionality that's available in the donations area of the software, just another place to get to it. So we're going to focus on deposit and payment transactions though. And then the third part of this page is your transaction history. So as you record transactions, they're going to be listed here in the transaction history section. So that's where you can see all of your transactions. And then at the very bottom of your page, of the first page of your register, you'll have this graph. So now if you remember setting up your chart of accounts, with your funds, you had the option to select a color for the fund. And so this is where that comes into play. You're able to see your different funds broken out in a graph form, just to kind of give you a picture of where your fund balances are at for the particular register account. So these are the fund balances for the different funds that I have within my checking account specifically. So if we scroll back up to the top, let's take a look at some example transactions. So first thing, maybe we want to record that we went to Office Depot to buy some office supplies. So all of the fields with an asterisk here, this is indicating that this is a required field. Anything that does not have one is optional. So things like comment or check number. But let's just start from left to right here. So we'll enter in the date. You can either manually key in the date, or you can use the calendar widget to select the date. Next, we're going to enter in the payee, or the contact for the transaction. If you have a payee that you've already recorded a transaction for, or that you've already set up in your contact list, then their name should pop up as you begin to type in the name, and actually first hit Office Depot. If we had a new payee that we hadn't set up yet, you would use the Add as New Contact option, but we'll go ahead and set up, use Office Depot because that's already set up for us. If you have a comment or note about the transaction, you can enter it here. So this, I might want to say this was for office supplies for new team members. And we spent $50 at Office Depot. I don't have a check number, so maybe I paid with a debit card, so I don't have a check number. That's not applicable, so I'm going to skip over that. The next thing I'm going to assign is the account. So this is referring to, for expenses, the majority of the time for an expense, this is going to be an expense account. And then conversely, for a deposit, the majority of the time you're selecting an income account. There are other situations where you might use a different type of account, but for the most part, for most payments that you're making, money that you're spending, you're going to be selecting an expense account because you already have, we already have it selected that we're working out of our checking account here. So again, you can either scroll through the list here of accounts, or you can start typing in the name or the number of your account to find the right expense account. So let's say this, we actually have office supplies. So we're going to select that this is an office supply expense. This is going to be just coming out of our general fund. If you have default funds set up in your chart of accounts, that will fill in for you, but you always have the option to manually change that as well. If you're using tags, you'll have fields to assign either a custom tag, or if you're an advanced accounting customer, you'll have your additional tag categories available to assign. But just as a basic entry, we just need to make sure we have our date, we have our payee, we have an amount, which for this payment that we made is going into the payment field. The deposit field gets left blank. We have our account and our fund. So we're going to go ahead and click submit, and that is going to post right here in our transaction history. So that way we can see that. Another example of what you might have, so let's enter another payment here. Maybe this one is at Target, where all good things come from. And so maybe we went to Target and we spent $100, but it wasn't just on, it was for a few different categories. So what we can do is there is an option to record a split transaction. So if we enter in the first line of our transaction with our date, payee, and payment amount, we can then click the split link here, and that's going to change the view of the transaction a little bit. So that way we can now select that, maybe we also bought some office supplies here. And, of the $100 that we spent, maybe we spent $20 on office supplies. Then we can click add another row, and that's going to give us another line to select another account. So maybe the remaining money that we spent at Target was for a fundraiser. So we can select that it was a fundraiser expense. And then we can put the amount that we spent for that category. So you can either fill out the percentage or the amount field. Whatever you fill out will fill in the other for you. So if I were to fill out the percentages, the amounts would update for me automatically. So if we have a transaction that needs to be split across multiple accounts, that's how you would do that. So you'd fill that out. Again, making sure that all of the rest of the required fields are completed, and then we'll click submit. And that will also be listed here in our transaction history. You'll see that under the account column, since there's more than one account, it doesn't list it. Instead, it says split transaction, but we can click on this transaction and view the details to see what accounts that payment was split between. Recording a deposit will be in the same way. The only difference is that you're going to be putting the amount into the deposit field. So let's say today we also had from, let's just say it's from Alex. We had a deposit that came in of $50. This was for his let's say department income, and it's the general fund. So same thing as with the payment, we'll want to make sure that the date, the payee, which in this case is who the deposit is coming from. So the payee kind of is the contact of the transaction. The amount, which in this case is going to be a deposit. The account, again, likely an income account and fund, and then we can click submit. And again, this is posted in the register for you. So this is, you're going to be recording deposits here that are not contributions. So recording a deposit in the register screen is not going to record or create a donation record for the individual. So the deposits that you record here would be separate from the contributions, but you may have a deposit that you need to enter, and you can do that from the register screen. So that's a brief overview of using the register screen. Again, this is where you're going to be spending the majority of your time in the accounting side of the software, recording things. Most of your transactions will be here. A couple other things I want to note before we move on to the next screen. You also have an import option. So if you are wanting to bring in multiple transactions, maybe past transactions that you have the information from your bank and you want to post those into Aplos in bulk, we do have a manual import option here. If you wanted to export your entire register history, there is an option to do that here. And then finally, if you're looking for a particular transaction, you can click on the search icon here. It's going to expand these search fields for you. So if you're looking for a transaction within a particular date range or from a particular payee or by an account or an amount, that makes it a little bit easier for you to find that. So we're going to move on to the next entry screen here, which is journal entry. So journal entry is kind of the most raw form of entering transactions into Aplos. This is the traditional double entry. We have a webinar that kind of goes into the details of how and when to use journal entry. So I just want to kind of briefly point out, the kind of areas of this screen and enter a couple of examples, but I would direct you to our entry screen on how to enter in journal entries and use the journal entry screen for more details on that. So just kind of an overview of the navigation here. On the left, we have your transaction list, so the history of journal entries that have been posted. And then you've got a couple different entry options here. So to start a new journal entry, this is what's already pulled up on the right for you. So this would start a new journal entry. To start a fund transfer is going to be a specific type of journal entry when you're moving money between funds. So within a particular asset or liability account, if you need to move money not in or out of the account, but just from one fund to another, you would be using this entry screen. If you're using a different payroll provider other than Gusto, you might be able to import a payroll file from them. So if you're using Sage, ADP, PayCycles, or Pathways, you're able to export a file from that system and upload it here as a journal entry into Aplos. And then the third option here is to import a journal entry. So if you have, especially if you have a larger journal entry that you're trying to record, or if you have lots of journal entries to record, the import option might be good for you to utilize. And we also have a resource specifically on that process that you can check out in our support center. So just as a kind of example here, again, not going to go into too much detail, but what you can see here is you'll have the journal entry number is going to be assigned for you automatically. So that'll already be filled in for you. You can assign the date. The memo is a required field. So let's say maybe we need to record a bank transfer, which you can also do in your register screen. But if you prefer to do in journal entry, you can also do here. So let's say we're recording a bank transfer. So we're going to be selecting our checking account. And it's part of the general fund. The payee and note fields are not required. So for journal entry, you will need a date, a memo, an account and fund, and then the debits and credits. And for your journal entry, your debits and credits must balance. So you'll notice at the bottom, there is a line here for out of balance. So the journal entry overall must be in balance, as well as the funds. So if you're using multiple funds within your journal entry, you'll need to make sure that you do have an offsetting account so that it is in balance and it can post. So let's say we're moving money out of our checking account. So for an asset account, which our checking account is, if we're moving $100, that's going to be a credit to that asset account. And then we're moving it into our savings account. So that's the account, still general fund. And you'll notice before we've completed, the screen tells us that we are out of balance right now. So once we put in the $100 debit, then the out of balance message or view here goes away. Just to show you for the funds, if I had selected, let's say my missions fund, the debits and credits balance, but this message at the bottom tells me that my funds are out of balance for the journal entry screen. So that's something you'll just want to pay attention to as you're recording journal entries. The post button won't be available if the journal entry is out of balance either in debits and credits or in your funds. So when we post that entry, that will be listed here. And we'll see there is the debit to the savings and the credit to checking. So again, we have some resources that go over how and why to use the journal entry screen in more detail. So be sure to check that out in our support center. The next screen here is going to be accounts payable. So this screen would be used to track bills and their payments. So if you receive bills, and especially if you're not paying them right away, if you receive a bill and then you're paying it at a later date, accounts payable helps you keep track of that, of the bills that you have due. So at the top, you'll kind of have a summary or a snapshot of what's happening in accounts payable. You'll have the fields to enter in a new bill, a new payable. You'll have the pay bill section, which is where you can keep track of bills that are still outstanding that have a balance. And this is also where you will record the payments of those bills. And then on the very bottom of the page, this is where you'll have the history of bills that have been fully paid and are closed. So let's take a look at entering an example bill here. So maybe we have, we can use the example here too of the squeaky clean office cleaners. So maybe this is our June bill. If I have a reference number or any sort of number that's associated on the bill itself, I can enter that here. So let's say this is this was bill number 5789. The bill date is the day that the date that you actually received the bill. So maybe this bill we actually received on June 1st. If you have terms to select, you can enter that here. Otherwise, you can enter in the due date manually, which is what we're going to do. And let's say this is due by June 30th. The amount here is going to be, let's say, $500. And so now when I enter in the amount of the bill, you're going to see this remaining balance amount pop up. And that is because what we need to do, similar to what you see on a split transaction in the register, we need to categorize this bill. So this is typically going to be an expense account. So let's say this is going to be a department expense, and this is the full amount is going to the department expense. But if we needed to split that out, again, very similar to the register page, we can click to add another row and split that out. The remaining balance is just helping you keep track to make sure that the total amount of the bill is distributed across the different expense accounts that you have. So now that we have all these things filled out, we can click submit. What that's going to do is it's going to refresh the page, and down at the bottom here, we now have this new bill that we've created for the Squeaky Clean office cleaners. And we are able to see that that is created here. So when we're ready to make a payment on the bill, so let's say this is the due date that we entered, but let's say we actually are making the payment today. So what we can do is we can fill in the amount. So if we're paying the full bill, we can either type that in, or if we check the box here on the right, it's going to fill in today's date as well as the full amount of the bill as the amount to pay. You can see in this other example here that we have, there was a $150 balance left because the bill was originally $200 and we've so far made a $50 payment. So there's a remaining balance of $150. So you can record partial payments if that is something that you need to do. But in this case, we'll go ahead and pay the full amount. So the easy way to do that is to just check the box here. If we were wanting to pay for some of these other invoices that we had received, these other bills that we'd received from the same Squeaky Clean office cleaners, we can also check the box here and pay them all together. And Aplos will generate one check for all of the bills that are being paid by the same from the same vendor. So if we're paying multiple bills out to the same vendor and we have them checked together, then they're going to generate just one check. If you are in fact printing checks. So once you have that information filled out, you'll have the option to either pay bills, which is just going to post the payment in your register for this bill payment. So this would be used if you're paying the bill electronically, or if you're manually writing out a check. You would choose this option. If you need to print a check from Aplos, you would click the Pay Bills and Print Checks option here. So I'll go ahead and do this option just so we can kind of hop ahead and see the check print screen. So when we do that, when we click Pay Bills and Print Checks, it's going to direct us to the check print screen. So these are the checks here that are listed that have been recorded, and you can see whether some of these were recorded in the register. This one is the one we just entered, and it was recorded in the AP or accounts payable screen. So for this one, if we wanted to print that check, we would check the box here. If we have an address to enter in, we can input that here. Fresno. If you have this information saved in the contact for the vendor, this will already be filled out just like it is for Aaron above here. but otherwise you can input that there. The starting check number is going to be based, it's going to auto-populate based on the last check that was printed. So the last check number, the highest check number that was printed is 3. So this check is going to be check number 4, which typically you're going to have not a single digit check number, but in this case, we'll just leave it as is. So then once we have that selected and any other checks that we're selecting, we'll want to make sure that our print setup is correct. So you can either print a draft style check, which is 3 checks to a page. So if you have this style of check, you can toggle to that option. If you're printing a voucher style check with the check on top and 2 stubs below, you can select that. The very first time that you print a check, you may want to print it on a plain piece of paper so that you can do a little bit of just troubleshooting to make sure that the check that you are printing is going to line up, the formatting is going to line up with the checks that you have. And if you do need to move the information up or down based on kind of the checks that you have and your printer settings, you can adjust the top print margin here. If you enter in a negative decimal number, it's going to be moving the information up and decreasing that margin. So it's going to scooch everything up a little bit. And if you're putting in a positive number, then it's going to increase the margin and bring things down. So if you do need to do that, you can. But once you have all of that set, you're going to click print. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring up this window here, and it should download to your downloads folder or your desktop, whatever option you have, a PDF version of the check. And that PDF is what you're actually sending to the printer. So you can click finish when you're done, and that'll bring you to the check, back to the check print screen. If you do have a need to search or reprint a check, you can do that from the search filters here. But by default, the check print screen is only going to be showing you checks that have not yet been printed and that are still outstanding, waiting to be printed or dismissed if it's a transaction that you've entered that has not, that does not need a check, like a debit card payment or electronic payment. So that kind of skips us ahead to the check print screen. But if we go back to accounts payable, where we recorded that check, we can see that that bill is no longer in the pay bill section because it's not outstanding, but it is now moved to the closed section. So that's where we see this is the bill that we paid here. Or the bill that we paid, we received it on June 1st, and it was due on the 30th, and it's closed and completed, and now in the history section. So that is accounts payable, and so similar or related is accounts receivable. So this screen would be used to record invoices that you are issuing. So if you have a need to issue invoices, you would be able to do that from here. The layout is very similar to accounts payable, where you have your snapshot up at the top as far as the activity that's going on. You'll have the option to create a new invoice here, and you'll also be able to receive payments. So as you receive payments for invoices that you have created, those will be listed here, and they will be remain there until they are paid in full. So if there's a partial payment that's been received, like in this case for Jane's invoice, we'll see the original amount of the invoice, the amount that's received, and the balance. And then again, we'll have the history or closed fully received area down in the bottom. So entering a invoice, you can either enter it in manually with all of the information. You can also use a template if you have saved a template. So when you're entering in an invoice for the first time, the first type of that invoice, you'll see this option down at the bottom to save the invoice as a template. So especially helpful if you have something like tuition payments or something that you have the same kind of format that you're going to be using. You can save that invoice as a template just to make it easier for yourself. So we'll go ahead and fill it in manually just so you can kind of see the process of what would need to be selected. But again, you can use a template if you have saved that. So let's say this is for, actually, let's use a contact that we already have. So I think we actually have, let's do Bruce Wayne. Maybe he has a, let's see, summer tuition payment, or I guess just summer tuition. The invoice number is going to be auto-populated based on the last invoice that you generated. So that will already be filled in for you. The invoice date is the date that you're issuing this. So let's say we are issuing this on the 7th. If you have terms, again, similar to accounts payable, you can select that. Otherwise, you can select a manual due date, which will say this is due by July 15th. The amount is, say, $1,000. Again, you'll see the remaining balance here just so you make sure that everything is distributed. If you have a message that you want to include on the invoice, you can include it here. This is an optional field, so you can also leave that blank. And then finally, we'll need to assign what income this is coming into. So this will record it as, let's see, maybe this is project income, and the full amount is going to that income account. If you do need to split it between multiple accounts, again, you'll have the add another row option. But otherwise, once you have all these things filled out and all of the required fields indicated here are completed, then you can click submit. That is then going to put the invoice here at the bottom. And once you receive payment for this, you will kind of do the similar process as accounts payable. You can either manually key in the amount that you're receiving, or you can, if you're receiving it in full, real easy way is just to check the box on the right, and that'll fill in everything, including today's date. And then you can receive payment for that. Once you create an invoice, if you just need to print it, you can also check the box here and click print invoices. That's going to generate a PDF of the invoice that you can either send to your printer, or if you have the customer's email on file, you can also email that as well. If you are set up with WePay, the same payment processor that is used for online donations, you can also collect invoice payments online using your WePay account. So you'll have an option to do that when you are emailing the invoices. So the check mark will be used both to print or email to send out your invoice, as well as you'll use that same check mark if you want to indicate that you're receiving payment for it. And then once that payment is received, so in this case, if we have received the payment for that invoice, it's going to move that down here to the bottom to history. So that is accounts receivable, and we're almost done here. So the last entry screen here that I want to talk about for recording transactions is bank integration. Just briefly, we do have separate resources that go over using this screen specifically, but if you are using bank integration, you'll have the transactions here, but again, you'll see the same information is really required for pretty much anywhere that you are recording transactions in Aplos. You'll always need to have a payee unless it is a journal entry. but you'll have your account, your fund, the amount, and then the date over here. So the fields that are required will be indicated for you, and this is just another way to import transactions, and those will be posted directly to your register, whichever register account that you have selected here. So that is a brief overview, or sort of brief overview of all of the transaction entry screens in Aplos. If you have further questions, our support team is always happy to help. Feel free to reach out to our team via phone call at 888-274-1316, or send us an email at support@aplos.com. We'd be more than happy to help with any questions, but happy recording.